The passage starts off in this phrase. You find it often in Scripture. Now it happened. Something is always happening. In fact, since we live in the present, the past is behind us, the future is ahead of us. We only live in the present. So if anything is going to happen, it's going to happen now. It always happens in the now. When God spoke to Moses and told him what his name was, he said, you tell the people I am that I am. And the reason he is because he's with us in the now. So when things happen, and things will happen, God is there. Sometimes promises are broken. Sometimes there's disappointment that comes our way, failures, accidents, rejection. I still remember the time when I was a kid. Always picked last for the game. Every game. Any game. Every once in a while I think about that, and then the next thought is, that's the reason why I'm not into sports. You picked me last, I'm picking you last. There's something that's important that the Scripture subtly teaches us, and that is when Peter was drowning, he was sinking in the Sea of Galilee, the first thing he did is he called on Jesus. Jesus, save me. When something was happening with my mother, as it often did, my mother would say in Italian, Gesù, pietà di me. And that was, Jesus, have mercy on me. That was my mother's way of inviting him to come into the emergency of the now. We all have those now experiences that we were not expecting to just suddenly come from the blind side, and they grab us, and we recognize that we're vulnerable and we need the Lord. That's what those now things come. You know, some of the now things are actually orchestrated. We don't see it because God operates in a supernatural way, in a very natural way, and it goes something like this. The children of Israel finally left Egypt, and they're on their way to the promised land. And while they're on their way, they run into the Red Sea. It's a dead end. It's a trap. That was their now. Now Pharaoh was coming after them, and he looked at it and he thought to himself, oh, they lost their way. They're trapped. It's my turn now to come in for the kill, he thought. What was really going on is that God was working in the sidelines, and the person who was trapped was Pharaoh. And he discovered too late he needed to learn how to swim. So God sometimes orchestrates things that are going on in our life, and at the time when they're going on, it doesn't really seem like God's hand is in it, but when you look back, you discover he's there. Now, things happen. And now God is there. Last week we talked about David, who went and rescued the people that lived in Keilah. The Philistines were stealing their stuff. David asked God if it was okay for him to go, and God said go, and he went. He got their stuff back. Problem with that was, because of all of the commotion of fighting the Philistines, King Saul was after him, and he found out where exactly David was, as he was coming after David because he knew he was in the area of Keilah. God told him, the king's going to come after you, and David took off. And look what we read in the first verse of 1 Samuel 24. It said, now it happened when Saul had returned from following the Philistines that it was told him by some snitch, saying, take note, David is in the wilderness of, he's in the wilderness, and the spy tells Saul exactly what wilderness he's in. And for all I know, this may have been a person that smiled at David. This is what it looks like. This is the place that God was preparing David to become the king. Sometimes we want God to use us. Lord, use me, please. And then he takes us to And we got to figure out what we're in the world doing. Now it happened. It happened. That's what happened. What happened is David finds himself in a wilderness, and he doesn't realize it, but King Saul is after him because he found out. And this is what the scripture says. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel, the elite, the Green Beret, and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of the wild goats. I looked it up, and this is what I saw. Can you imagine trying to traverse this mountainside like a goat? Like one false step and they're doomed. That's why we sing that song, lead me, guide me along the edge. For if you lead me, I won't fall off the edge and die. That's how precarious sometimes our walk with the Lord is. We don't always realize it, but things are going on around us. Things are happening, and we find ourselves in places like this, and no wonder we realize how vulnerable we are and how much we need God for the very next step that we've got to take. These goats are incredible. And God needs to lead us in a way so that we can get through the stuff that we're going through. Now, Saul's got his 3,000 men handpicked, and they're out there in the wilderness looking for David, and Saul makes his first mistake. And Saul came to the sheepfolds by the road where there was a cave. He went in to attend to his needs. There was a little sign that said restroom, and he went into the cave, and David and his men were staying in the recesses of the cave. There are hundreds of caves out there. How in the world does Saul go into the one cave where David and his men are? And you know what bothers me about this? He's got 3,000 hand-picked men, and nobody secured the area for him. What are they doing? I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. When you have bodyguards, you're supposed to check out the places. But he walks in because he's the king, and David's watching. So his men. And then the men of David said to him, "This is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand." And it's amazing how people want to use God to further their own personal agenda. But they're telling David has been running from King Saul, so it would be natural when you're in battle, you're going to fight back. And there is something inside of us that if you hit me, I want to hit you back. Isn't that right? There is something inside of us. And this is what we read. The men want David to take revenge because revenge is part of our DNA. I read about an elderly lady. She was driving this real fancy, luxurious car, trying to get it into a parking space at the mall, when some young kid in a sports car zipped right into the spot. She rolled down her window and said, "What do you think you're doing, sonny?" And he said, "I'm young and I'm fast." So she put her car in drive and she rammed into his sports car, backed up and rammed into it again, backed up and rammed into it again. He said, "What are you doing, lady?" She said, "I'm old and rich and I'm getting even." There is that, I've had thoughts like that, but I have 2 dogs in the back and I got to be careful about that. Revenge. Years ago, I mentioned to the congregation that I found a book called Revenge, 200 Dirty Tricks to Play on People You Don't Like. After the service, somebody came up and said they wanted to know about that book. And I said, you don't need a book to take revenge. It is built in. It is natural to take revenge. Years ago, and I was thinking, while I was going through this, I was living in Sharon, Pennsylvania. Nancy and I were living there, a pastor, and we had this home paid $22,000 for it. It was a nice home. Today, it'd be worth a lot more. But anyway, that's what we paid for it. But we had no central air conditioning. And in the summer in Pennsylvania, you can get real sticky and muggy. This one particular summer night, it was sticky and muggy, had the windows open, but not much of a breeze. And in flies a mosquito. They have them back there. And so this mosquito is buzzing around my head, and I'm trying to go to sleep. I can't go to sleep anyway because it's too hot and muggy, but there's this mosquito. And I'm trying to be patient about the whole thing because I'm shooing it away, and I'm hoping that it'll get the message. But it doesn't. It keeps coming back. There was a moment, just a flash of a moment. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the newspaper, rolled it up, and now I was Rambo. I had one thing in mind. I didn't want to hurt it. I wanted to kill it. I wanted to get rid of that thing. It was bothering me. So I ran around the room waiting for it. I got it. I went to sleep, and here's the first thought I had. Tomorrow, I'm going down to the hardware store and buying an air conditioner for this bedroom. And I did. Sometimes a little revenge kind of opens up the door for understanding. You may do a bad thing, but it also opens up some ideas. You really don't need a book to figure out how to take revenge. If you have a newspaper, hand by it, as usually your first thing. What David did is he came into, he crept up to Saul and he cut off a corner of his robe, and then backed off into the recesses of the cave. And King Saul then left. And when he left, David had a moment of his conscience bothering him. Now it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him because he cut Saul's robe. What he did was nothing compared to what he could have done. He could have killed him. But his heart bothered him. His conscience bothered him. And he told his men, he said, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." There are people that God anoints and places them in certain positions to accomplish jobs. And sometimes we may not like the person that God appointed to that job. That happens all the time. Presidents end up in all kinds of difficulty because they've been appointed or elected to a position, and some of the people don't like him. And David really shares something that Congress needs to pick up on. And that is to show respect for the office. You may not like the president, but you need to show respect for the presidency. Sometimes God raises up people we don't like. If you go through the scriptures, you'll discover some very interesting things. For instance, God raised up a man by the name of Cyrus, who's a Persian king. He was a wicked man. But God anointed him, called him a shepherd, to raise him up to have his people go back to Jerusalem and build a temple. Because God can do that. God does things. I just got through a biography reading Abraham Lincoln, and I want to share something with you. Abraham Lincoln was probably the one president that got into office with the least amount of votes. He ran at a time when people were totally against what he was teaching, which was there was no a way to compromise between slavery and freedom. And so he squeaked into office. And one day, elected and president, the South started to secede from the Union. We don't want to be a part of this Union. And in Alabama, they had banners written, "Resistance to Lincoln is obedience to God." So they made a holy war out of this thing. And they were totally disrespectful to the president. I mean, when you read the biography, you really pick up the feelings of the people. They were anti. Not only did the South hate him, people in the North hated him. He had the lowest rating of any president as far as approval rating, because he lived in a very difficult time during the Civil War. But when there was a plot of ground, the Gettysburg battlefield, he was invited to speak, and so he spoke for 2 minutes, and we know it as the Gettysburg Address. When he got through this 2-minute speech, newspapers all across the country lambasted him. They said everything he did was inappropriate. They said, we're ashamed to let other people know that he's our president. And they called him a lot of names. Gorilla was one of them, and ape was another one. They disrespected the position until he was assassinated. And when he's assassinated, he becomes the greatest president that this country has ever seen. I can't wait. Isn't it really interesting? The Congress ought to pick up, I'm just a little aside, Congress needs to realize that there's a man in office, and you have to respect the office. Maybe what you should do, instead of spending all your time trying to impeach him, to pray for him, because that might be a better thing to do. And I'm not taking sides. Like, I'm not saying you need to vote Republican or Democrat, because every time a president gets into office, somebody finds him in the Bible. When Obama was in office, they were talking about abomination. It's in the Bible. And when Trump is in the office, and the trump of God shall sound. So you're going to find somebody. The important thing is we need to learn to be respectful. God knows what he's doing, and God will get his job done. Even if you don't like the man, you need to respect the position. And David leads the way. He explains that if it's the Lord's anointed, we need to be careful we don't mess with the Lord's anointed. He's doing what he does. David arose after Saul left and went out of the cave and called out to Saul, saying, "My Lord, the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed down. That's respect. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Indeed, David seeks your harm'? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave. I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See the corner of your robe in my hand? For in that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you. I have not sinned against you, yet you hunt my life to take it." David did nothing worthy of being put in the crosshairs, but he is, because it happened, and God knew it would happen, and God was with David throughout the entire ordeal. All of the years that David would be living running from King Saul, God was still in control. God was preparing. What if it is that God is preparing you today, involved in preparing you for ministry that he has in mind for you, and you're going through some stuff that's real difficult, and you're in your own wilderness, but God's preparing you. He's got plans. You say, "Well, I'm too old for God to have plans." Really? Moses was 80. Caleb was 85 when he took a mountain. We're never too old. This is the day the Lord has made, and today is the day that God is preparing us for the job that he has for us tomorrow. Now things happen because they happen now because God's got plans for tomorrow. We just got to hold on and trust God. David goes on to say this, "After whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom do you pursue? A dead dog? a flea? David is smart. Instead of aggravating the situation, he's disarming. But David knows he's not a dead dog. Dead dogs don't fight. They don't bark. They don't bite. They don't make puppies. They don't even wag their tails. And David's saying, I'm a dead dog, a flea. Jesus said this. He said something in the Sermon on the Mount that is out of context, but I want you to see it because it gets my attention. Agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him. Now, he's not meaning what I'm about to say, but the statement is so powerful. Agree with your adversary quickly while you're on the way with him. Sometimes somebody will call you a fool. Instead of proving to them that you're not a fool, accept it, because they don't even know the worst. Fool is fine. God has chosen the foolish things of this world to confound the things that are wise. So it's okay. It's all right. I was sitting down at a board meeting. There was one board member in the room, and a fella came in to make a complaint. And one of the things he said to me, he says, "What kind of a shepherd are you?" And I'm thinking, whoa. And I told him, I said, "I'm not a shepherd. I'm a sheep, like you. There's only one good shepherd." But I knew what he was getting at. It was mockery, and I'm just a sheep. That's agreeing with your enemy quickly while you're in the way, so you don't have to create a bigger problem than it is yet. But in the back of my mind, we're saying, I'm just a sheep sent out among wolves, one of which is you. I didn't say that. I just thought it. I think things. Sometimes you just got to realize that somebody's going to say something, instead of you defending yourself and fighting it and getting worked up. And I'm stupid. Yeah, I'm a fool. I'm everything and anything that you can say. But when I leave this place, I'm going to keep on doing what God called me to do. Thank you very much. Now, what really got my attention when I was going through this passage was the second verse. This is what it says. Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and went to seek David and his men. And this is the thought I had. Saul handpicked 3,000 chosen men to go after one chosen man. When you got 3,000 coming after one, the odds are incredible. How do you beat the odds when you got 3,000 against one? Usually numbers like this are very frightening to us, but these numbers don't impress God at all. God is never impressed by the odds. When he considers the nations, he considers the nations as nations, plural, as a drop in the bucket. Goliath was big, strong, tough, nasty. He had a sword, a spear, a shield, a sidekick. And David had one little stone. It was anointed. One man chosen by God against a whole pile does not faze God one iota. Nebuchadnezzar said he would heat the furnace 7 times hotter than it ought to be. That's got to be pretty hot. But the only thing that fire did is burn off the ropes of the 3 Hebrew boys. When they finally got them out, they didn't even smell the smoke. Because God's not afraid of the odds. He can handle the odds. Gideon was outnumbered 450 to 1, but didn't faze God at all. They shouted the sword of the Lord and Gideon. There was only one sword, the sword of the Lord and Gideon. All the men had was a pitcher with a light inside and a trumpet. And they defeated 350,000. I'd like to see that on video. Yeah, David says this in Psalm 91. He says, you're standing all alone. You're all alone. You're God's man, but you're all alone. He said, 1,000 are going to fall at your left-hand side and 10,000 on your right, and it will not come nigh you. And I'm reading that passage, I'm saying, 1,000 falling on my left and 10,000, and you're saying this doesn't come nigh? That's pretty close. And God says, I got you covered. Things may look bad, but I got you covered. David, they got 3,000 guys looking out after you, but I got you covered. I'm gonna keep you covered. David had his stuff. When you read through the story of David, he's surrounded, he's trapped, he's in trouble all the time. King Saul is it's like you're looking at a Wile E. Coyote running after the Roadrunner, and he's almost going to catch the Roadrunner, and then God does something, and Wile E. Coyote's got to travel all over again looking for, because God is not impressed by the numbers, and God knows how to take care of those that are his own. One chosen against 3,000 chosen men. And that's why when we feel we are surrounded, and when we feel we are trapped, and we feel we are in a place of difficulty, what we need to do is exactly what David did. In fact, if you read through the Psalms, you will discover that David constantly is calling on the Lord. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul and leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Every time you see David, he's crying out, God help me, God help me. And so do we. We have to be able to call out his name too.
I must tell Jesus. I must tell Jesus. Jesus can help me. Jesus alone. Jesus can help me. Jesus alone.
You want to know something about the odds that God can handle? Jesus was all alone when he went face the enemy in the wilderness and took him on single-handedly. Later, Jesus would say, and in essence would say, go ahead, make fun of me. Reject me if you want. Arrest me. Condemn me. Mock me. Put a crown of thorns on my brow. And if you want, you can nail my hands to the cross beam. If you think I'm going to fight, so you're going to tie my hands up, I just want you to know one thing. Don't lift me up. Because if you lift me up, I will draw all men unto me. If you lift me up, I will ransack hell. I will grab the keys of death. I will build my kingdom. I will tear down yours. I will forgive sins. I will take sinners and make them saints. I will do everything I promised I would do. I will heal the sick. I'll proclaim liberty to those who are oppressed. I will open up prison doors. I will send my spirit, and he will pour out on all flesh, and the knowledge of the Lord shall fill all the earth. As the waters cover the sea. Just don't lift. That's the mistake they made. They lifted him up. Then early Sunday morning, before the alarm clock went off, before the day actually broke, somebody rolled a stone away. Jesus was up. Because God can handle the odds against him. And he can handle the odds against you.
Give the enemy